In the early hours of the morning, night shift workers in a relatively basic factory unload cotton steel sheets off the back of a delivery truck before thoroughly inspecting the material. The steel is then carefully unrolled, cut, and placed into stamping machines to create corrugated patterns that will slot together with other box section reinforcements. It's then welded together, sandblasted, painted, and weather sealed before being sent off for final inspections and delivery. The job is large, but workers must be incredibly precise because the end product, a 20-foot ISO standard container, only works if it fits together perfectly with thousands of other containers coming out of this factory every year, and the millions of similar containers already in circulation around the world. This otherwise unremarkable shipping container is going to live an incredibly tough life. It will be exposed to corrosive salt, constant sun, desert heat, and Arctic cold, all while being banged around and stacked under hundreds of tons of its boxy comrades. Containers like this one have changed the course of global economic history. Before them, shipping stuff across the world was a slow, impractical, expensive, and risky exercise. Up until the 1960s, if you wanted to move stuff across the world, you had to pay people to load your goods by hand and unload them by hand. Goods often went missing or were just straight up stolen by the people handling them. By the time you had overcome all these problems, it was almost always easier and cheaper to just pay the same number of men to make things locally. But by standardizing containers that could be slotted together like Lego, they could be loaded onto ships and handled by machinery that did nothing but deal with exactly these containers. No matter how long the journey, the only people that ever actually lay hands on the cargo are the people that pack it at one end and the people receiving it at the other end. For better or for worse, global trade has exploded thanks to metal boxes just like this one. It alone will transport billions of dollars worth of goods and travel more than the distance between the Earth and the Moon, 20 times over, all in the course of its surprisingly long career.
At the end of the day, whether tariffs will also be slapped on crude oil imports.
Asian markets fell sharply after Japan announced it will remove South Korea from its whitelist of favored export partners.
The journey of a million miles starts here in Singapore. The city-state may be best known for its high finance, luxury shopping, and ultra-expensive real estate. But about a 10-minute drive from the glitz and glam of the Marina Bay development, there's a surprisingly large industrial park packed end to end with small, unassuming factories and warehouses. From this district of the micronation, the Malaysian mainland is less than a mile away. During quiet hours, it would be faster to drive over the border than it would be to drive back into the center of the city. But despite Singapore's expensive real estate, expensive labor, and strict regulations, factory businesses like Sigma Cable Company, STS Steel Tubes, Visolube, and Tang Seng nitrogen pumps chose to pack in here even when there's a cheaper, less restrictive alternative literally within eyesight across a small channel. The reason why they do this is simple, practical economics. The whole area is directly attached to the second busiest shipping port in the world. Singapore's low taxes, massive oil refinery, and convenient location at the intersection of the world's busiest shipping lanes means that it makes billions of dollars every year from being a city-sized 7-Eleven for the world's merchant marine fleet. Ships are stopping off here anyway, so while they do, they may as well fill up their tanks, resupply on provisions, and yes, if the first engineer calls for it, lube up their machinery. These factories pack themselves in here so they can sell their products directly to these ships as they pass through, without dealing with the hurdles of crossing a border. One of those businesses is TLS, one of the world's largest container manufacturers that operates out of the relatively modest factory from earlier. Ironically, shipping containers are actually terrible products to ship because their price per cubic meter is extremely low. The commercial price of a standard 20-foot container from TLS is around $3,000. There are almost certainly discounts available for major bulk purchases, and the price does increase if you want to buy a specialty container, like one with refrigeration and insulation. But the backbone of global shipping, the standard no-frills 40-foot shipping container, is sold for around $3,000. Now that's a challenge because the cost to ship that container from Los Angeles to Singapore at today's shipping rates would be approximately $3,000. So by the time it made it to where it needed to be, the cost to ship the container was worth more than the container itself. For all of global shipping and the trade it enables, there are 3 variables that dictate where and how things are made and where they're sold: Size, weight, and price. Small, lightweight, and expensive products like computer chips, medicine, and cosmetics are much more practical to trade all over the world because their shipping costs are low, especially compared to their end price. A large, cheap, and heavy item like a shipping container, though, will almost never be moved empty because it just doesn't make sense to take up room with it. On the other hand, just one container full of box sections and rolled up sheet steel could make hundreds of other containers, so it's simply more economical to make them where they're needed than to move them without paying cargo on the inside. In July of 2022, the world saw the result of this practical economic reality firsthand. The price of global shipping spiked due in part to the buildup of containers on the American West Coast. A spike in trade volume coming into America overwhelmed ports, and there wasn't the same volume going back out, so containers piled up in holding yards just outside the shipping terminals. Eventually, the ports started fining companies for keeping their containers on their lots. They started at $100 a day, but these fines increased by $100 every day and compounded day after day. So within a week, the cost of keeping these containers in storage was more than the cost of the containers themselves. Even today, sending one of these containers from America to China is about a third of the price of sending it in the other direction. This is further complicated by the different types of containers that need to be in the right place at the right time for the right cargo. It's an insanely complicated logistical puzzle worth billions of dollars to the companies that can get it right. The brand new container back in Singapore was purchased in advance by a company called Triton, one of the biggest shipping businesses in the world. However, curiously, they don't operate a single ship. Container leasing companies purchase these containers in bulk and then rent them out to ships as they are needed. Triton is just one of the many players in this game, but you've almost certainly seen their boring, nondescript brown containers if you've been anywhere near any kind of industry. Most smaller ship operators just want to focus on getting their ships around the world's oceans as efficiently as possible. So handling the delicate game of having the right containers in the right ports at the right time just simply isn't worth the time or upfront investment. Shipping containers might be relatively cheap individually, but even average container ships can now carry 4,000 containers, with new megaships like the MSC Irina able to hold well over 20,000. For all but the world's largest shipping companies, it's simply more efficient to rent containers from companies that specialize in container investments and have storage yards dotted around the world. That way, if a particular route calls for a lot of insulated freezer containers and the return route requires more liquid storage containers, then the shipping company can be flexible to that demand without worrying where to put the unused containers. The vast majority of containers, though, are simply empty shells like this one in Singapore, which has already been rented out to a small independent shipping company, filled with cryogenic equipment from Tang Seng nitrogen pumps and loaded onto an independent freighter down at the dock. This is an unusual first journey for a new container because a small ship like this one isn't cost competitive with the mega freighters that have become extremely popular within recent years. Of the 100 largest container ships sailing the world, 80 of them were built within the last 5 years. 2020 provided global markets with lots of cheap money, and big ships like this one cost a lot of money to build. So it's the perfect opportunity for companies to double down on creating the world's largest and most efficient container ships. In this game, size matters, and the race to get bigger all comes down to one simple formula. A ship that is twice as long, can stack containers twice as high, and has twice the beam will be able to carry 8 times as many cargo containers, often while burning less fuel than smaller but more outdated competitors. Crew sizes also don't scale linearly. Even the infamous Ever Given only sails with a crew of 25, and larger, newer ships can get away with even fewer than that. This means the cost per container shipped shrinks dramatically with relative increases in the size of the ship itself. The ship our container is being loaded onto is much smaller and falls on the wrong side of this curve, but it still remains viable because it works along the routes that these big companies either aren't able or aren't willing to operate in. Big ships are highly specialized. They need massive, deep water ports with dedicated loading equipment, and they're simply too fat to navigate bottlenecks like the Suez or Panama Canal. A lot of these new ships were designed from the ground up to only ever sail in the Pacific Ocean, connecting the biggest ports in Asia with the biggest ports in North America. This little ship, on the other hand, can dock just about anywhere, and even if the ports don't have their own loading infrastructure, it comes with its own cranes to move freight on and off from itself. The nitrogen pumps are headed to a food processing plant in Dubrovnik, where the container itself will be unpackaged before being loaded onto an even smaller ship that will take it to a storage yard in Greece. The container company will carefully track the new container as it moves throughout the world, updating their database as it goes. If they have too many containers in one particular port, their operations team can be alerted to lower rental prices for outbound hires, which should make them more popular than their competitors and help get their assets out there generating a return. Likewise, if they have a shortage of containers, they can raise rental prices, or in desperate circumstances, call up one of their suppliers and order another container to be made and put into the database. For these companies, it's better to buy a new container to make it available to their clients than to inconvenience them by saying that nothing is available to rent. Containers are cheap. What they're actually selling is convenience. Anyway, as long as they spend most of their time filled with paying cargo, shipping containers like this should pay themselves back very quickly. The only real challenge is making sure they actually spend most of their time at sea and not sitting dormant in a company's storage yard. To add one final complication, these containers must be regularly inspected to ensure their seaworthiness. A standard container only works if it remains standardized. These containers not only need to hold up to the rough conditions they're exposed to and keep their contents safe, they also need to form a reliable building block in the modern shipping Jenga towers. One weakened container can compromise the safety of an entire ship, the billions of dollars in cargo it's carrying, and the crew on board, so containers are inspected regularly and thoroughly. With preventative care, most containers last about 10 to 12 years before they're no longer seaworthy, but that doesn't mean they can retire just yet. These older containers are often used exclusively for rail or truck transport, where they won't be stacked as high or be subject to the rolling of a ship. Depending on how they hold up, they can easily last another decade on land. After that, it simply becomes cheaper to recycle the scrap steel and stamp out another shipping container to start the whole process all over again. Either that or sell it to some Pinterest hippie to make a house out of. There are no wrong answers. Now, getting rid of the containers is easy. Getting rid of the ships themselves is a lot harder. But it's created one of the most fascinating grey markets in the world, so if you're interested in that, you should be able to click to that video on screen now. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing for more micro stories with big impacts.